Alright, welcome. Today we're going to be taking apart an Alienware 13R3. This is a Dell Alienware gaming laptop with the i7 7th generation and a GTX 1060 video card. And we are going to be leaving the display complete, so just keep in mind we are not going to be taking apart the display assembly. So the first thing we need to do is just flip the laptop over, and then we're going to remove the bottom cover screws. And since we're going to be taking the laptop completely apart, we're going to take apart take off the front two screws and the two that are holding on the rear vent. But if you just need to remove your cover to swap out a part, it's just the 5 screws here on top. Alright, and I should mention this is just a regular Phillips bit. This is a 2.5, and this will take apart pretty much all of the laptop. If there are any smaller screws inside, I'll let you know, but generally these are pretty easy to take apart with just one screwdriver. Alright, so now we have the screws out, we're going to get a fingernail underneath the cover. And it's pretty easy to see where the cover and bottom case meet on this because they're different colors. So once you get some of the snaps popped off, then the rest should come pretty quick. And that's how you remove the bottom case. Alright, so taking a quick look inside, we have easy access to the SSD, Wi-Fi card, and the RAM. So if you need to replace any one of those, it's quite easy. 5 screws and you're in. It looks like the fan and heatsink are going to be quite a bit more in depth. There's a small, it's either the bottom case or a subframe. Some of the Alienwares have a kind of a subframe inside, so we'll kind of see how this is constructed as we take it apart. But first we'll go ahead and they left a pretty convenient battery disconnect here, so that's what we'll do first. We'll just get a fingernail on that battery connector and just wiggle it out. Kind of have to work it back and forth. And once it's slid out of that connector, then there's no power going to the laptop. And then we can go ahead and remove the memory. And just spread the little retainers, it'll pop up, and just pull it out of the slot. Alright, SSD, looks like just one screw holding that in. And this particular model has 2 bays for an NVMe 2280 SSD. So you can theoretically just use SSDs for all of your data, and you won't have to worry about a hard drive. Alright, next we will do the Wi-Fi card. So we're going to need to remove the one screw, which has a bracket that holds the Wi-Fi antennas in. And it looks like one of these antennas was already popped off, so if you're having some problems with your Wi-Fi signal, you might want to check that and just make sure that both your antennas are still clipped in well. Okay, so it looks like on this model the little port that the antenna sticks to came off of the Wi-Fi card, so the antenna didn't pop off. The solder for that Wi-Fi card was just bad, so this person was probably having some trouble with their Wi-Fi. And if you are, I would definitely check the antennas and make sure that they are still connected to the card. Alright, so looks like we've got everything we can remove currently, so we're going to go ahead and try to remove this rear vent. It's just some plastic tabs up here if you kind of lift up, and that will release it. Alright, so alright, at this point, I believe we can go ahead and just start removing the screws. I'm going to take out the, it's going to disconnect the palm rest from the subframe assembly, and then we should be able to pop that palm rest up and off. It looks like they've left a window here to disconnect the ribbons from the motherboard, which makes me think the palm rest is probably going to disconnect from the chassis after we get all these screws out. So let's remove all of the bottom case chassis screws. Alright, now that we have got the screws that we can see disconnected, we'll go ahead and unplug the rest of the connectors that we can see here. So a precision tool definitely helps, and this tool is called a spudger. And it's made out of plastic, so it's harder to break things with it, and it can help you get into some of these hard to reach places. Alright, so for the touchpad, keyboard backlight, and keyboard, all three of these connectors, just the retainer just flips up, and then you can remove the ribbon. And then I would flip them back down just to keep them safe. Make sure that one's all the way out. I think what's going to happen is they left that there so when we separate the palm rest, these ribbons are going to be pulled out of there. So that's why they leave you some extra space to remove those ribbons before you actually try to remove the palm rest. And all the screws that you need to remove the palm rest are labeled with a P and a circle around it, which is nice. It makes the laptop more user-friendly if you're trying to do your own repairs. And it's nice to see that some makers are still doing that. Alright, so what we're going to do next is separate the palm rest from the bottom case, and the seam is right here. Palm rest is only a couple millimeters thick. So we're going to get a spudger and just go around the, we'll start at the front and start popping that palm rest off. I just want to do one last check to make sure all of the screws are removed. Okay, I just had to work with it a little bit more to figure out if there was some reason why it wasn't coming apart, and it looks like the chassis or the subframe inside actually comes up and off of the palm rest. So they still separate in the exact same way, but we're going to leave the laptop upside down and just finish working off the little plastic inside frame. So most laptops are, the most recent ones are kind of like that, where the bottom case is going to come off and they have everything attached to the palm rest. Classically, like the older laptops, it was opposite. Everything was in the bottom case, and to access it, you had to remove the palm rest. So they can kind of go either way. So it doesn't look like you even need to remove the ribbons until you have that subframe off, but just to be safe, I removed them, so they're already disconnected, and we can move on to removing the battery. So the battery feels nice and loose, and we already disconnected it, so all I have to do now is remove it from the case. Alright, so it looks like the next thing we'll go ahead and remove is the fan assembly. And I noticed that the DC jack is underneath all of this stuff, so try not to break your DC jack because you're gonna end up having to take apart most of the laptop to replace it. Okay, so I think now we'll go ahead and remove the fan, the dual fans and the heatsink, and I believe they are kind of connected together. So you'll want to also disconnect the fans from the motherboard before you try to remove it. Okay, got those fan connectors, and now we'll remove the heatsink screws. Doesn't matter the order that you remove them, but if you want to reinstall your heatsink with new thermal paste, pay attention to the order that's stamped on the heatsink. It goes from 1 to 7, and that's the order that you're supposed to tighten them up in. Alright, so we got those heatsink screws removed, and now we can just give it a little bit of a wiggle. And it seems nice and loose, so we'll go ahead and gently flip it over. Pretty dirty. So as you can see, the fans have quite a bit of dust in the fins, and there's probably a lot in between the fans and the heatsink here. So definitely, you know, every so often blow some canned air into your heatsink and try to flush some of that out. Especially on a gaming laptop, cooling is one of the most important things. So you want to definitely stay on top of your fans. Alright, so now that we have the motherboard out, or actually the fans out, we have easy access to the rest of the motherboard and the DC jack. So now we can go ahead and finish removing that DC jack. Well, perhaps not. I do see now that they have a Phillips head screw underneath the motherboard, so you're going to need to remove the entire motherboard to get that DC jack out. I see that bracket kind of goes underneath the motherboard and it's secured by that one screw. So maybe we can just kind of wiggle it out. No, that's still on there pretty well. Okay, so we'll finish removing the motherboard screws here, and then we can hopefully remove that DC jack. So if you're going to go like this far into your computer and you're not really experienced with it, I would definitely record what you're doing. That way you can play it back and figure out how some of this stuff is routed, and the order of putting stuff back, because you don't want to like put most of it together and figure out you forgot something a little ways back and have to take apart most of the laptop again. Alright, before we finish taking out the last of this motherboard screws, I do remember one thing about the Alienwares. And that it does have some ribbons on the top. So if you look in here, there's a few little spots that have looks like your video cable connector, and they do not leave you a whole lot of room to get in there. You can sometimes just remove the motherboard most of the way and then kind of get those from underneath on the other side, but just because it's the right way, I'm going to try to do it from up here. But it's definitely like pretty hard, just because of how deep that connector is in there, and there is a little tiny retainer bar that needs to flip up for the video cable that you've got to try to get underneath somehow. So I'm going to try just a small flat bit and try to pop that bar up. There we go. So you can try to do it the other way. If you can't get your fingers in there, you don't have the right tool, you can just start by removing the motherboard, tilting it up, and then trying to get these ribbons. But since I'm already over on this side, I'll try to just get them out through here. Okay, so this other looks like for the logo LED, I might end up having to get that one from the other side. You can't really tell what you're pulling on. Oh, I got it. So it's just a regular, just straight pull-out connector, and if you get one of the little side notches, you should be able to lift that up. Alright, so we'll go ahead and finish removing the last of the screws and ribbons, and we'll see if we can get that motherboard flipped over. It does look like the HDMI port pokes through the back of the palm rest, so you'll need to lift the motherboard and pull it laterally to remove it from the case. And then we'll slowly flip it over. So these are the three connectors. So you might be able to just get the motherboard kind of lifted up and get those from the back, or if it's easier to try to dig down into that little cavity and release them that way. But the main thing is, either way works as long as you don't break anything. So that is it for the motherboard. And this is the pram battery. We always leave that in place. Alright, so the DC jack, looks like we can finally get that bracket off of there, and once we have that bracket removed, then we can pull that from the case. But again, I would definitely be careful with your DC jack, because it is literally disassembling just about the whole laptop to get that out. Alright, so we're ready to separate the display assembly from the palm rest assembly. So anything that comes out of that display assembly, we need to make sure that it is free of these little wire channels. Which is easier said than done sometimes. Okay, and the Wi-Fi antennas as well. I need to free those up so they can pull through the palm rest. And the logo LED cable. So we got the Wi-Fi antennas, the logo cable, and the video cable nice and loose. So when we go to remove those hinges, these wires should pull safely through the palm rest. Alright, so taking a quick look, the touchpad is just a number of Phillips screws, and that can be removed, as well as the, looks like the keyboard backing plate is held on with screws, which is nice. It means you can remove it and replace your keyboard independent of the palm rest. We're going to be leaving these together as an assembly, but as you can see, it's just a few Phillips screws to remove either one, and same with the speakers. These are kind of just held in place by, the Phillips screw here or a grommet. All right, flip this around, get a better look, and 1, 2, 3, 4. So it looks like just a couple more Phillips screws on each side, and then we'll remove the display assembly. They added another screw. Okay, so I'll just give it a little bit of a wiggle here. And it looks like we can maybe help the cables to pull through a little easier. So the only thing that was kind of holding it in its place is that the LCD was fully closed. So maybe just lift that lid up a little bit before you try to remove it from the palm rest, but it doesn't matter a whole lot. It's pretty easy to remove the screen on these. And there's one last thing we can remove from the palm rest, which is the power button. And it sits over here on this side underneath that little Alien logo. And it's just a couple Phillips screws. Alright, so we're left with the display assembly. We usually leave these ones complete if you need to get into your screen, especially if it's a touch screen. For the vast majority of those, the back cover will separate from the rest of the assembly first, and most of the screen components will be attached to the front as an assembly. So I can see there's a little bit of a gap here between the front bezel and the back cover. So if you just separate those two, you might be able to pop that back cover off. Sometimes they are held on with some pretty strong adhesive. But in this case, you know, we definitely would go the easier route and just replace it as an assembly, unless you absolutely need to just replace the screen, you know, because of cost or whatever. But sometimes these can be definitely a pain to get into, but I think the Alienwares aren't too bad. The screen and the digitizer will be one assembly. The back cover will come off of both of them, and then, you know, just a couple screws in there for the hinges. So that's how you disassemble a Dell Alienware 13R3. This has the NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1060. And if this video helped you out or you liked the video, please like and subscribe. Thank you.